Hi, this is Max and Gabi, and we are going to talk about the four macro skills and integrated skills.
Well, first of all, we are going to start with listening. It's a very demanding skill. Really, it's considered a demanding skill both for teachers and for students as well. So that's why this is like starting acknowledging the elephant in the room. I mean, by the big thing. As I said, it's demanding both for learners and teachers, and historically, listening pedagogy was quite simplistic. Teachers often just played recordings and asked comprehension questions and corrected their answers. That was what the listening activities consisted of. Their focus was on the product of comprehension rather than understanding the intricate processes involved. But listening, as it says here in the slide, is far more than just hearing. It's an active process that begins even before a speech is recognized and continues long after the recording stops. What I mean is that it begins before, as it involves planning and predicting what one is going to hear based on prior knowledge of the topic, the speaker, the context, sorry. So for instance, teachers can use pre-listening activities like brainstorming or discussing the topic to help learners predict information and vocabulary. This generally helps students to prepare to what they are going to listen. And it continues after spoken input stops, because learners can engage in post-listening activities where they think about what they have learned, how they have listened, and how they can improve their listening performance in the future. Well, with regard to meaning, really it is actively constructed at all levels and within context. These constructions involve an interaction between two main processing types. We have bottom-up processing, which focuses on building meaning from the smallest units, like individual sounds, phonemes, and combining them into words, phrases, and sentences. This involves perception, that is matching sounds heard to known words, also called decoding; parsing, which is analyzing decoded words in larger units based on grammar; and vocabulary knowledge, which means understanding individual words and formulaic expressions or lexical chunks. Then we have top-down processing, which relies on activating previous knowledge about the language, text, and culture to make sense of the input, helping listeners to infer and construct meaning by filling gaps. This includes schema or background knowledge, that is well knowledge from personal experiences; discourse knowledge, that involves understanding how different types of spoken texts are constructed; pragmatic knowledge, that is grasping the intended function of an utterance beyond its literal meaning; context, which means the construction is also influenced by the topic, the participants, the communication purpose, and the place or setting for the interaction. These processes interact simultaneously, managed by working memory systems like the phonological loop, which is responsible for holding verbal information briefly, and the central executive, that directs attention and integrates information. For native speakers, perception and parsing are often automatized, but utilization, where meaning is connected to prior knowledge, requires more effort. For language learners, working memory can easily get overloaded, making both bottom-up and top-down processes crucial but challenging at the same time. Well, here we have Brown, which is a very popular author, and she answers this question: what is an active listener? And according to her, we construct like reasonable interpretations from often under specified input, and actively we seek information when needed. So listening is goal directed, according to her, meaning that we listen for a specific purpose. This active listening can occur in two main contexts. And these contexts are one way, in which the listener doesn't participate. And there we have, for example, listening to lectures, radio, the radio, films. And then we have a two-way listening activities or situations, which are interactive. And there we have conversations, interviews, or discussions, among others, of course. But to really understand how comprehension happens, we need to look at the cognitive processes involved. A classic model by this man, who is a psychologist, John Richard Anderson, he made that in 1995, outlines three overlapping phases, and they are perception, where listeners match the sounds they hear to words they know; parsing, almost simultaneously, decoded words are analyzed in larger units based on grammar and lexical cues; and utilization, that this is the higher level process where information from the phonological, grammatical, and lexical levels is connected to the listener's prior knowledge and the listening context to interpret the meaning and function of the utterances. If not needed immediately, the meaning is stored in long memory, and in interactive listening, it is held longer in working memory while formulating a response. That is what he says. Now, what makes a successful listener, or what makes this in a successful way? Well, successful listeners draw upon several crucial types of knowledge. First of all is schema or background knowledge. That is what we know from our life, or what we have heard, that is world knowledge from personal experiences. Then we have a knowledge of language, and here is talking about what the person knows phonologically, grammatically, and the kind or the range of vocabulary the person has. Then we have knowledge and discourse and language use, that is understanding how language is constructed and used in different contexts and discourse types; and pragmatic knowledge, which is the knowledge, how the knowledge is used, that is crucial for grasping speaker interaction and the social cultural rules. Well, and active listeners also use a range of skills and strategies to manage their listening. It's also important to distinguish between them. We have listening skills and listening strategies. And here we have that listening skills are acquired abilities that become automatized through practice. That means that the more we practice, the more we have them. And then we have listening strategies, that these are planned and consciously adopted ways of listening to improve comprehension, communication, or cope with difficulties. They can direct attention, coordinate cognitive processes, such known as the metacognitive strategies, and be used before, during, or after listening. Over time, strategies can develop into automatized skills. They can begin as strategies and then they become automatized skills. Well, as we said, skills are abilities that become automatized through practice, such as decoding sounds, and Vandergrift and Go, I think it's pronounced like that, identify 6 core skills. And they are listening for details, that means identifying information like names, dates, or numbers. Listen selectively, that is paying attention to particular parts and ignoring irrelevant information. Then we have listen for global understanding, that is grasping the overall theme, topic, or purpose. Listen for main ideas, that is understanding key points, arguments, or directions. Listen and infer, that is making up for missing, unclear, or ambiguous information using background knowledge, visual clues, or tone. And finally, listen and verify, that is checking understanding using contextual clues, background knowledge, or speaker information. Well, the purpose for listening strongly influences which skills are most relevant at a given moment, and listeners adapt their skills accordingly. While developing these skills is helpful, it remains effortful for learners, necessitating the use of listening strategies. So Vandergriff and Go also identify 12 common listening strategies that you can see here, that is planning, that is developing awareness of the task, an action plan, focusing attention, that is hearing input and avoid distractions, monitoring, that is checking, confirming, and correcting comprehension during the task, evaluation, that is checking the outcomes of listening and listening plans, inferencing, that is using prior knowledge to guess unfamiliar words and fill gaps, elaboration, that is using prior knowledge to extend and embellish interpretations, prediction, that is anticipating content, contextualization, that is placing what is heard in a specific context, reorganizing, that is transferring understanding into another form of storage or retrieval, using linguistic and learning resources, that is relying on L1 or additional languages or other resources, cooperation, that is working with others for comprehension and learning assistance, and finally, managing emotions, that is addressing negative emotions that might affect comprehension. So, given this complexity, how can teachers effectively help? Well, that's the big question. The field has moved towards process-oriented listening pedagogy, which aims to make like the hidden processes of comprehension visible to learners. The approach combines task-based learning with a metacognitive approach. So, going to task-based metacognitive instruction, these instructions include one-way listening tasks, where learners obtain information from texts with minimal interaction or no interaction, and then use it to achieve outcomes, make lists, summaries, or notes. For example, When you say listen and restore, or listen and sort, listen and evaluate, or they dictate and students have to write. Then we have two-way tasks, that is the second one, where learners engage in interactions, alternating roles as listener and speaker, responding directly to provide information or seek clarification. These involve dialogical discourse and collaborative outcomes. For example, describe and draw. One person describes and the other draws. Simulate and discuss, that is role playing. And another thing we can do is to incorporate metacognitive activities, which are crucial for helping learners think about their own thinking and learning. They make comprehension processes visible, encouraging reflection, strategy adoption, and evaluation. Activities can occur before, during, or after the listening, and they include like self-directed listening guides, questions learners answer before or and after practice, listening diaries, journal entries about specific listening events, and process-based discussions in which students discuss their approach, goals, problems, and strategies. And finally, self-report or checklist. They are questions learners consider after a lesson. All these activities can be integrated into a 3-stage lesson structure, like pre-listening, that is preparing the language or the content and the context, while listening, and post-listening activities which focus on reflecting generally what they have seen. Well, a prime example is Vandergrift's in 2004 metacognitive pedagogical sequence, a strategy-based, according to them, a strategy-based method that involves multiple listens to a text and focuses on planning, monitoring, problem solving, and evaluating. Learners listen to a text 3 times, engaging in activities like writing down recognized words, identifying problems, taking notes, discussing strategies, often culminating in listening with a transcript for decoded practice. Well, about academic listening, we're going to see something really brief here. Academic listening is processing spoken language in contexts like lectures, primarily for knowledge acquisition. Students here face specific challenges, including adapting to the speed of extensive monologues, diverse accents, heavy vocabulary loads, and recognizing lecture structures. Well, Flowerdew and Miller in 2005 developed a pedagogical model for academic listening that includes crucial dimensions like being individualized, cross-cultural, social, affective, contextualized, strategic, intertextual, and critically evaluative. So looking at the future, what are the future trends? In listening construction include an expanded role for metacognitive activities and a better balance between top-down and bottom-up processes. For academic listening, there's a trend towards greater authenticity of content and delivery in materials, using more real-world lectures and exposing students to diverse accents and natural spoken delivery features. So, in conclusion, the journey of teaching and learning listening skills has evolved significantly. It has shifted from a mere product focused testing to a more holistic development of knowledge skills and strategies. Listening is a complex interplay of cognitive and social processes enhanced by linguistic and prior knowledge and crucially by metacognitive awareness. So, teachers are needed more than ever to scaffold learning, make these hidden processes visible, and empower learners to become self regulated and highly skilled listeners. Well, that's all. It's long, but it's a lot about to say about listening. Now, Maxi will start talking about speaking, another macro skill.
Yes. Thank you, Gabi. It was really interesting. I think it's really important what you said about um, paying attention to the context, not only um, paying attention to the social part, because it's not only listening, but also taking into account social aspects, right?
Yeah.
And you also mentioned some things about the skill being something complex and having a lot of characteristics that operate simultaneously. And I think that's really interesting. And it's also something that happens with speaking. What I'm going to talk about is that speaking is also a complex skill, and it demands um, multiple things simultaneously, as you said previously, right? And it has um, we have to monitor others and produce our own contribution when we are speaking. It's not something that operates by itself, let's say. Then another important concept that I'm going to talk about later on is fluency versus accuracy. This is a long debate in pedagogy, and well, currently there is a current leaning towards fluency as the primary aim, and this occurs especially in communicative contexts. Then we have the importance of pragmatics, what we were talking about previously. Um, L2 speakers need to be socially and culturally competent, and we have to understand that it's not only what to say, but we also have to pay attention to how to say that and to whom we're speaking, right? And then there's another important concept, which is authenticity in instruction. The need for materials and tasks that reflect real world language, moving beyond script dialogues. That is another thing that you mentioned previously in listening, and it also occurs in speaking as well. And then we have the influence of corpus linguistics and conversation analysis. These fields provide empirical data to inform teaching practices, particularly regarding spoken grammar and interactional patterns. Could you please move to the next slide?
All right.
Thank you. Um, we have some important ideas or facts. The first one is the characteristics of speaking complexity. We have clustering, which is thought groups, hesitation markers, and pausing, colloquial language like slang or idioms, and suprasegmental features such as stress, rhythm, and intonation. Then we have fluency versus accuracy definitions, what I mentioned previously. Accuracy is conforming to the language system itself, while fluency is operating the system quickly. These are like opposite. There's a dominant view on fluency versus accuracy. In most cases, the primary aim in teaching speaking is to improve students' fluency in informal conversation interaction. And language-focused learning should typically not exceed 20% of contact time. Then we have pragmatic appropriacy. This is essential for communication with proper politeness, let's say, directness and formality. And we have authenticity meanings, authentic teaching materials and self-expression, and the development of authentic voice. Artificially created materials are, let's say, less beneficial than comparative research-based materials that are authentic in both content and interactional environment. Then we have corpus-based L2 teaching. Uh, this led to increased knowledge of spoken grammar, which differs significantly from written grammar. Spoken grammar includes phrasal chains, elliptical forms, hesitation markers, discourse markers, etc. Empirical findings on spoken English, large-scale corpora reveal frequent collocations, like, for example, I think, and also the importance of discourse markers for interactional fabric. Um, then we have conversation analysis in L2 speaking instruction. This informs what to teach and how to teach, right? By describing interactional practices, and it provides insights into error correction techniques. Um, we also have the teacher's role in error correction. Um, Decisions include when to correct. For example, if we have to correct the students immediately, right after they make a mistake, or we have to wait until they finish speaking. Who corrects, if the teacher corrects, if the peer corrects, if they self-correct, and how to correct. Um, if it's indirect indication, if it's repetition with rising intonation, if we provide the correct version of what they said, if it's a meta-linguistic explanation. And in this field, direct correction is generally avoided in favor of less direct strategies. Then we have the principles of teaching speaking. This focus on both fluency and accuracy, intrinsically motivating techniques, authentic language, appropriate feedback, linking speaking and listening. For example, we have like both skills combined, opportunities to initiate communication, and also developing speaking strategies, right? Then we have class structure and needs assessment. Oral skill classes are often structured around functional uses, non-academic or academic context, like presentations, discussions, um, proficiency level, real world tasks, and cultural background influence content, right? Then we have common classroom activities like discussion and group work. They require clear roles, purpose, time limits, and follow-up. And the teacher has to monitor and provide feedback. Activities like presentations, in this case, the students can choose the content and they are guided by rhetorical genre and time. Also, videotaping allows for critique and analysis, and impromptu speeches can practice hesitation markers. Then we have activities like role plays. These are suitable for practicing sociocultural variations in speech acts. And finally, conversations to analyze and evaluate language, like, for example, transcription, communication difficulties, and repair. And oral dialogue journals, they combine fluency practice with accuracy feedback. Then we have accuracy-based activities. Um, Communicative activities can still address accuracy because they normally focus on fluency, but we can also teach and use communicative activities to improve accuracy. For example, drills or grammar practice activities. And it is the teacher who decides which errors to correct based on communication impediment and pedagogical focus. And we have technology tools like video conferencing, podcast, voice-based tools. They provide opportunities for reflection, for feedback, and for it, they can be used to transform speaking, right? If we hear ourselves in our recording, we can improve later on. And assessment is also important. Um, and it's important that we as teachers propose activities for assessment, like classroom performance evaluation, formative or summative, and I don't know, large scale oral proficiency exams are discussed with criteria like fluency, coherence, lexical resource, um, grammatical range, accuracy, and pronunciation. And for future trends, um, we have the attention that we have to pay to sociopolitical issues. For example, English as an international language, and addressing varieties and standards set by all users, not just native speakers. Then we have, could you please move to the next slide? Thank you.
Right.
We have fluency-oriented second language teaching. We have the multifaceted definition of fluency. Fluency is not a simple concept, but encompasses various aspects like speed, pauses, coherence, appropriacy, and creativity. There are different definitions of fluency according to Hartman and Stork, which is the accurate use of structures, meaning focused, automatic, normal conversational speed. Then we have Broomfield's definition: natural language use, student dominated, meaning based, maximizing acquired language. Fillmore says that fluency is talking without awkward pauses, coherent, semantically dense sentences, appropriate use, and creativity. Hedge says that fluency is the ability to link units of speech together with facility and without strain or inappropriate slowness or undue hesitation. Thornbury says that fluency is pauses long but not frequent, field occurring at meaningful transition points, and long runs of syllables between pauses. And finally, the definition of component and Regenberg is that there can ultimately be no single all-purpose definition of fluency. These are a lot of definitions, and I'm gonna move to the factors influencing speaking difficulty. These are cognitive, affective, and performance factors. They interact together to determine a speaker's fluency. Uh, there's an importance of automation in speech processing. Fluent speech relies on automatized conceptualization, formulation, and articulation. And then what can we do as teachers to foster speaking fluency in students? Well, as teachers, we can support the students by reducing cognitive load through language, through knowledge, and we can create strategies to support them. And we have to carefully select the tasks um, to ease the stress of speaking, right? And then we can also rely on task repetition and pre-task planning. These are key pedagogical techniques for improving oral fluency. Then we have supporting learners in fluency activities, um, language support, pre-teach vocab, knowledge support, background info, and strategy support, for example, paraphrasing. Um, pre-task pre-task planning, I'm sorry, um, it provides attention to non-automatized language. Um, it also encourages appropriate grammar, and it leads to greater language complexity. Um, it improves fluency, experimentation, content complexity, and the ability to self-monitor. Then we have task selection criteria for autonomous language use by Thornbury. Um, this is interactivity, productivity, challenge, safety, purposefulness, and authenticity. Uh, we have activities such as task repetition that improves performance by increasing the familiarity and predictability. Um, an author called Bygray in 2001 found greater fluency and complexity after repetition, um, even weeks later. Then we have the 4-3-2 technique, uh, which is the speaker prepares a 4-minute talk, then repeats the talk um, to two different listeners in 3 and 2 minutes, respectively. And this type of tasks can increase fluency, um, can also increase control over delivery and forced repetition. Then we have modifying task repetition, reducing time, new audience, new but similar material, and increasing complexity to maintain motivation. And then we have feedback and correction and fluency activities. Generally accepted, it is accepted that teachers should not interrupt for grammar or vocabulary errors during the activity to maintain focus on meaning. The correction should occur after the activity, post activity, let's say. We should be gentle, tactful, and the intervention, I'm sorry, should be selective. For example, echoing or a formulation of what the student said. Um, but it's important that we correct the student after he or she finishes. Um, Classroom applications, information gap activities. Students have incomplete information and must communicate to close the gap. Um, these are activities that improve fluency because they have a missing piece of information that they have to complete. So they they're going to speak uh, with each other, and these information gap activities include, for example, completing the missing information, finding differences, role plays, and this type of activities emphasize the importance of fluency over specific linguistic features. Other activities that we can use as teachers are jigsaw activities. For example, each group receives part of information, they become experts, and they share the information orally to complete the whole. It benefits efficiency, active learning, individual contribution, the student responsibility, and their interaction. Then we have consensus building activities. The students agree on something, involving presenting views, arguing on something, listening, compromising. For example, they have to solve a problem, and they focus on the process and the language used. Then we have fluency circle. Students, for example, they practice dialogue, they exchange in rotating pairs, and they move from reading to look up and say. Um, I'm sorry, moving from reading to look up and say to personalization, internalizing structures. And then we have games and projects. They engage motivation, and this can ultimately improve fluency because we are providing opportunities for extended and meaningful language use. Then we have, could you please move to the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
How we can teach pronunciation. Um, if we pay attention, students often experience frustration, they feel judged, or they feel embarrassed when they have to speak because of things like their accent, or they can get emotional maybe, and they feel embarrassed. So it's hard. Speaking is a complex skill. Um, so pronunciation involves uh, both individual sounds like consonants and vowels, and global aspects like stress, rhythm, intonation, which functions as a system. This traditionally, the sound system of English was described and taught in a building block, um, moving from sounds to syllables, then phrases, and finally extended discourse. But this bottom up approach has been replaced by a more top down approach, and they have acknowledged that suprasegmental and segmental features are interconnected and experienced naturally in the stream of speech. Um, we have the segmental features, which are the individual sounds like consonants. These are sounds that are characterized by their place of articulation, um, their manner of articulation and voicing. Then we have the vowels, uh, and regarding the suprasegmental features, we have thought groups, which are meaningful chunks of speech that speakers divide in utterances into using pauses, similar to how writers use punctuation, but in speech we don't have punctuation marks, so we have to make pauses because we cannot put a comma or a dot. Um, we have prominence within each thought group. There's usually one prominent word or syllable that stands out. and speakers use prominence to signal new intonation, let's say, information, I'm sorry, or highlight or contrast information, or put the emphasis on something, right? Um, in intonation, prominence, I'm sorry, is accompanied by a rise or fall in pitch, and this creates a melodic line known as intonation. Intonation patterns are associated with communicative intent rather than grammatical forms, let's say. For example, a WH question can have different intonation based on, for example, if it's a request for information or if it's a request for clarification. It's a common challenge for L2 speakers, for a person whose primary language is not it's not English, or if we learn another language, it's a common challenge um, that we lack this pitch variation, and that our intonation is, let's say, flat, or that we make errors in intonation. And finally, we have rhythm. Um, rhythm, the rhythm of English is created by the alternation of longer or stressed and shorter or unstressed syllables. Um, then in speech, we also have connected speech. In rapid English, various modifications occur at word boundaries, such as linking sounds, I'm sorry, a final consonant shifting to the next syllable, uh, sound blending, sound disappearing, and unstressed function, words being reduced. Um, then we have intelligibility as the primary goal. The aim of pronunciation instruction should be successful communication, where an accent is not or shouldn't be a distraction, rather than a native-like accent. Research has suggested that while a target-like accent might be possible for some highly um, motivated adult learners, intelligibility in real-world context is a more realistic objective. So the primary goal is for us to understand each other and not to focus uh, or not to give so much energy to accent, let's say. Um, Pronunciation instruction is effective. Research supports that targeted instruction, especially in context, and if we incorporate technology, leads to improvement. And systematic and principled teaching. Effective pronunciation requires realistic goals. It requires a comprehensive plan. It requires that we use techniques and appropriate assessment. Effective pronunciation teaching begins with uh, setting clear, achievable goals for our students. And we have to focus, like I said, on intelligibility and communicability rather than aiming for a native-like accent. So we shouldn't push our students to sound native or something like that. If they want to do so, great. If they don't want to do so, that's also great. Could you please move to the next slide? Thank you, Abby.
Yes.
Communicative framework for planning, description, and analysis. listening discrimination, controlled practice, guided practice, communicative practice, and integration with other language skills is crucial. Um, Description, let's go with the first one, description and analysis. It involves, in this initial stage of description and analysis, the teacher introduces a specific pronunciation feature. It explains when and how it occurs, and this might involve using charts, using diagrams, or other visual aids. Um, the teachers can present the rules for a feature directly, or they can provide, or we can provide multiple examples and guide the students to deduce the rules themselves. That's optional. For example, um, a teacher might explain the sound TF in chair, or demonstrate how intonation rises at the end of yes or no question. Um, then let's go with listening discrimination, which is the second one. It involves that activities in this stage focus on helping the students distinguish and identifying specific pronunciation features. Um, the goal is to direct our students' attention to features that they might not recognize. Um, for example, um, contextualized minimal pairs. An example from Gilbert, an author, involves that the teacher secretly choosing to pronounce, is it light or is it right? And the listener responding with the appropriate answer, no, it's heavy, or no, it's wrong. Um, Within the same category, we have intonation patterns. Students might pay attention to the difference between falling intonation and rising intonation for tag questions, for example. And the final one within this category is identification exercises. Um, Students may work with a transcript of a listening passage and mark occurrences of features like pauses between thought groups or linking between vowels. Then the third one is controlled practice. In this stage, the student's attention should be focused on the form of pronunciation. The aim is to improve or build accuracy in producing the target sounds or the patterns. For example, repetition in chorus, reading aloud, or kinesthetic reinforcement. Um, for example, we can make a gesture and um, in order to teach stress syllables, for example, we can make something with our body so they remember, right? Guided practice, which is the next one. In this one, students gradually begin to shift their attention to meaning, grammar, and communicative intent, but they still maintain some focus on the pronunciation target. These are bridging activities that we can use to help students make the transition. For example, our students can interview a partner and then report on the interview, specifically focusing on S, ending and linking. For example, my partner likes to play soccer and watches movies on the weekend. Then we have communicative practice. In this stage, um, there's a balance between form and meaning, let's say. It allows learners to use pronunciation naturally in communicative context. And we as teachers, we should set a clear pronunciation objective in advance for these activities. And the feedback should be focused on these objectives that we have set. For example, a role play, a debate, an interview, a simulation, a drama scene. These are activities that are effective for this stage. And a key principle for this framework is that pronunciation is not a standalone subject, but it should be integrated with other language skills. Um, for example, listening, for example, grammar, vocabulary, spelling. Um, yes. And well, um, we can also integrate this with techniques, tools, and technology. Um, Techniques like imitation, articulatory explanations, reading aloud, the making gestures thing that I was talking about previously. Um, we can use technology. Uh, we also have to assess pronunciation and provide feedback to students, um, make them aware of their mistakes. Um, and we can also profit from self-monitor and peer feedback. So they can provide feedback to themselves. Um, and the final thing is that we have to evaluate their progress over the course of time. Um, then I think we can move um, to your topic.
Right. Well, very interesting. I think that like all the macro skills are saying like they should be like a combination between all of them. So I will go to reading in language learning. Here says from decoding to deep engagement. And here I propose you to imagine reading not as a solitary silent activity, but as a dynamic engagement with text that profoundly influences and is influenced by all other language skills, as we were saying. In fact, the same that happened with listening. Historically, literacy was often confined to just reading and writing skills. However, in recent years, the concept of literacy has undergone profound changes, expanding to encompass a range of other related skills. This includes the oral language skills needed to talk about and support reading and writing, critical thinking for real life and academic purposes, and even visual literacy, which involves interpreting and producing visual content. Well, the truth is that with technological advancements, new literacy now encompasses the ability to find, identify, evaluate, use, and communicate with a large variety of resources, including text, visual, audio, and video. This broader view recognizes reading and writing as a critical thing for life, from understanding raw science to evaluating advertisements and even for enjoyment. So, just as I mentioned, with listening, some traditional English or ESL or EFL programs previously adopted a segregated skill approach to reading, viewing the mastery of discrete skills such as reading as separate from content learning or other language skills. This approach could lead to language for language's sake without emphasizing learning for authentic communication. However, in reality, even a course specifically labeled intermediate reading often involves multiple integrated skills through creative teaching. For instance, a teacher might give oral directions, and this is including listening, have students discuss readings, so that involves speaking and listening, or ask for written summaries, which involves writing. Similarly, many textbooks, while highlighting specific skills, include tasks that naturally integrate all language skills. The integrated skill approach is beneficial because it exposes learners to authentic language, challenges them to interact naturally, and helps them to rapidly grasp the richness and complexity of English as a means of real interaction and sharing. So here we have what makes a skilled reader. Efficient word recognition and vocabulary. Skilled reading requires a rapid and automatic recognition of words and phrases. So a large recognition of vocabulary is crucial, with evidence suggesting that learners need to recognize at least 95% of words for adequate comprehension, and 98-99% for more fluent reading. So knowing a word involves understanding its literal meaning, connotations, syntactic constructions, morphological options, and semantic associates like synonyms and antonyms. So English language learners particularly need early, constant, and deep instruction in vocabulary as they face the enormous challenge of learning tens of thousands of words to catch up with the English native speakers. Regarding discourse structure awareness, well, it's a fact that good readers recognize how textual information is organized. I'm talking about headings, subheadings, transition phrases, rhetorical patterns, and use these cues to achieve more comprehension. Then we have main idea comprehension. This is at the core of reading instruction and involves identifying key points and prepositions in a text. Then we move to strategic metacognitive reading. Well, engaged readings are metacognitively aware, meaning they can reflect on their thinking and learning. They consciously plan, monitor, evaluate their comprehension processes, and this includes asking questions, analyzing, synthesizing, and predicting. Many strategies like asking questions or planning apply across multiple skill areas and help weave the skills together. Regarding reading fluency, well, defined as reading at a certain speed, for example, 200 words per minute in adults, with adequate comprehension, let's say a 70%. Fluency is a combination of reading rate and comprehension, and it requires rapid automatic word recognition skills developed through extensive practice. And finally, here we have motivation. So motivated readers are more engaged readers. Teachers play a central role in fostering motivation by demonstrating enthusiasm and providing engaging materials and creating a supportive classroom environment in which if they fail, they are not they don't feel ashamed. Well, let's move on to text types. When considering types of text, it's important to distinguish between narrative text, that is stories and expository texts that are information-based texts. While narrative texts are often used to teach the basic principles of reading, learners transition to reading to learn using expository texts to increase knowledge. And they can start, sometimes when you're a child, you start with narrative stories. Generally, children's book focuses on that. And then when they are like more mature, they probably are exposed to expository texts. And in these texts, they increase their knowledge of vocabulary, and in this way, they improve their reading skills. So let's go to the next one. Well, a crucial conceptual underpinning for second language literacy is the relationship between the learner's first language, or L1, and second language, L2. L2 literacy is similar to L1 literacy in certain basic ways. What I mean is that children who already know how to read and write in their L1 can use this knowledge to learn English more quickly and easily. They can transfer knowledge about sound systems, how letters represent words, and how different genres use language. Conversely, L2 literacy also differs from L1 in important ways. English language learners often develop oral language and content knowledge simultaneously with literacy skills, and they may not bring the same background knowledge as native English-speaking peers to their reading and writing. So here we have some classroom approaches regarding reading. We have content-based instruction. This approach emphasizes learning subject matter like science or social studies through language. It naturally integrates all language skills in a highly communicative fashion, allowing students to practice language while learning real context. That is, for example, when they learn history or biology in English, let's say, for example. Then we have a task-based instruction, that these are communicative tasks that require comprehending, producing, manipulating, or interacting in authentic language with a principal focus on meaning. This often involves a pair or group work, like developing a class newspaper or enacting play scenes, as role-playing could be also. Then we have explicit literacy component instruction. And English language learners benefit from this instruction in essential literacy components such as phonemic awareness, decoding, encoding, vocabulary fluency, and comprehension strategies, and writing as well. However, even when focusing on lower order skills, instruction should always occur within a meaningful, interactive, and interesting context. Then we have structured reading lessons. Well, these lessons should follow a pre, during, and post-reading framework. Pre-reading activities establish purpose, tap prior knowledge, introduce key vocabulary, and build interest. during reading activities, guide comprehension, help students construct meaning, and allow them to monitor their understanding. And then we have post-reading activities, which check comprehension, promote discussion, and provide opportunities for rereading, summarizing, and applying information. So these are all the classroom approaches. But how do we build fluency in reading? Well, developing fluency, to do this, teachers can use activities like rate build up reading, where students reread text multiple times to increase their speed and comprehension. Other techniques include shadow reading, that is listening and speaking along with a text, and repeated reading, that is reading a short passage over and over until criterion levels are met. Oral pair reading is another way of doing that, where students read aloud to a partner, and this can also help them build some fluency. Well, then we have vocabulary instructions. This is essential at all levels. Teachers should select words for explicit instruction based on their importance for comprehension and general usefulness. Techniques like concept of definition maps can introduce new words by connecting them to what students already know. Also, creating vocabulary-rich classroom environments by displaying words and engaging students in meaningful tasks with them also promotes learning. Sometimes they put like posters with words in classrooms or things like that that can help learners like keep certain vocabulary in mind. So what are the teaching comprehension strategies? Well, activities like questioning the author, elaborative interrogation, and comprehension monitoring help students actively engage in text. Summarizing, as discussed earlier, is also a powerful comprehension strategy. There are a lot of things you can do to help students acquire more comprehension. So, extensive reading, one of the most important elements for building reading and writing fluency, is simply reading a lot. Scaffolded silent reading involves setting aside class time for silent reading or students selected materials. I mean, they can choose a book they like, and we have to give them some time to read this. This can be done with the teacher's support, monitoring, answering questions. Then if we focus on academic language, well, in academic context, learners need to develop academic language, which is cognitively demanding and context reduced compared to informal oral language. This involves complex grammatical structures, specialized vocabulary, and specific language functions. Teachers can foster this by explicitly teaching language functions like agreeing, explaining, comparing, or predicting. Ultimately, the goal for learners to become engaged readers who read widely with different purposes, read fluently, comprehend deeply, are metacognitively aware, and are motivated. But this requires like a lot of patience and sustained integrated approach to teaching all the language skills. So now Maxi will talk about writing.
Okay, thank you, Abby. I think we can agree that in all four skills, we need to prepare
Yes.
students before giving them tasks. And ultimately, the goal is for them to communicate effectively. In the case of reading and listening, for example, that they're not communicating, but they're hearing or reading input, and it's important that we provide them with support and scaffolding, not to leave them alone, and so they feel frustrated or they feel judged in the case of speaking and such. um, so in the case of writing, it should be seen as an act of communication with a specific purpose, and we have to think of an audience because we are writing for for an audience, right? And so it requires clarity, and it requires organization of ideas, right? um, so in order to master the mechanics of writing, um, we have to recognize letters. We have to associate letters with their corresponding sound. Thank you, Abby.
Right.
We have to know how to spell words. We have to know how to use punctuation marks. The difference with speaking, as I was saying, is that in speaking we don't have punctuation. We have to make pauses um, to separate um, what we are saying. We don't have a dot, we don't have a comma. But in writing, punctuation is essential, and it's crucial for meaningful communication, right? In writing, uh, like in the other skills, we have other skills involved. It's not just writing, but it's also reading what we are writing. It's also listening. If we read aloud, if another person reads aloud, we have to listen. Um, and also, if we read, we are speaking. So it involves all other skills. Um, the instruction when teaching writing should move from mechanical drills to more communicative, um, process-oriented tasks. Um, let's just say that it shouldn't be all about um, accuracy, like we were speaking previously, but also fluency and meaningful communication. Um, we can profit from technology, digital tools, and real life situations that allows us as teachers to provide students with opportunities for them to improve their writing skills and for them to practice their writing. Could you please move to the next slide?
Right.
You. The most important facts and ideas in writing is that writing is an interactive process. It takes place between the writer and the reader via the text. Um, so it requires the writer to anticipate the reader reactions and adhere to Grice's, which is an author, Grice's cooperative principle. Uh, the text should be clear, it should be relevant, it should be truthful and interesting. Um, I'm going to explain a little Grice's cooperative principle. So it was introduced by philosopher um, H. Paul Grice in 1975 in an article called Logic and Conversation. And it basically describes the implicit agreement that participants in a conversation um, will cooperate with one another. So when we are communicating, this cooperation principle assumes that the participants of the conversation will be informative, that they will be truthful, relevant, and clear, and that this will allow for meaningful communication to happen. Um, then we have the importance of linguistic accuracy in written communication. Faulty mechanics, for example, illegible handwriting, spelling errors, faulty punctuation, inaccurate sentence structure can make the message that we are writing um, unintelligible or hard to understand, let's say. Um, then the early stage writing goal, it recognizes and reproduces elements of the target language writing system for a sound basis for letter and word recognition when reading. Um, this impacts on L1 writing system. Um, for example, in Chinese, the writing system is difficult. It requires careful training. It's not so easy because the person learning Chinese has to associate the graphic signs with vocal sounds. Uh, it also requires training in the phonological process and direction. Then we have the sound-based um, or alphabetic. For example, the Roman alphabet, learners already have direction. Um, the letters are similar. The phonological process is similar. And then we have different alphabet. For example, the Cyrillic or Arabic alphabets are different. Um, so in this case, we have to learn the graphic characters and we need direction for this. Can we please move to the next slide? Thank you. So writing in combination with reading. Um, Early stage includes letter recognition or letter discrimination, sound to letter correspondence, word recognition, and basic spelling. And later expands to punctuation, capitalization, and sentences and paragraphs. There's an interaction between reading and writing. Um, the writing practice facilitates early reading by developing letter and word recognition. Um, the sound spelling correspondences. Um, English orthography is systematic through complex, requiring teachers to combine phonetic and graphic units. Um, for example, the consonants and the vowels. Then we have tips for improving writing, um, teaching the mechanic goals. We can improve letter recognition, especially for L1 systems. Practice sound spelling correspondences via all four skills and move letter words to meaningful sentences and discourse. Uh, Type of recognition tasks, for example, identifying the odd man out. This is a very common activity where we observe a given set of items, and we have to find a common characteristic or pattern that most of them have, and then select the item that does not fit the shared characteristic or pattern. For example, we can use activities like finding same letters, matching capital in a lower case, connecting words, and we can combine those with drills, let's say, tracing or copying. Then sound spelling corresponding tasks. For example, we can match sounds to written forms. We can emphasize spelling environments. For example, CVC versus CVCE. This is basically CVC words are consonant short vowel consonant. For example, the word cat, C is the consonant, A is the vowel, and T is the consonant. And then we have the CVCE words, like for example, the word tube, the word poke, the word like. Um, we can use this type of words to um, improve writing, let's say. Um, then in the next slide, we have more advanced writing tasks, um, communicative. So shift the focus from mechanics to process with communicative goals. Like for example, practical writing tasks, um, procedural, predictable format, suitable for spelling, morphology, um, for this type of practice. For example, to-do lists or making a shopping list, making notes, writing messages. It can also be digital. It doesn't necessarily have to be written in hand. Then we have emotive writing tasks. Um, this is a personal writing, for example, a letter to a friend, a narrative, a social network message, a journal, a diary. This type of activities focus on format, punctuation, and appropriate expressions, let's say. And then we have school-oriented tasks, for example, assignments, summaries, um, answers to questions, essays, and the audience is often the teacher who corrects the exercise. But eventually, it can be um, another reader. For example, if we're writing an essay to another type of authority, um, so then we have dialogue journals. They are useful for communication, especially in beginners, and they allow for one-to-one interaction and personal feedback, personal input. They can start uh, as an interactive picture book, and then move to an email or a social network. And then we have discussion forums. They provide an authentic setting for a wider audience, um, and they focus on the content over the quality of writing, um, in order to encourage participation. Then in the next slide, we have the considerations for teaching second language writing. Writing as a complex ability. Uh, language 2 involves both cognitive skills, individual writing ability, and L2 proficiency. So they are like combined together. And the social cultural phenomena, communication within the course communities for specific goals. Like I was saying in the speaking part, it's not only having the linguistic competence, like Chomsky said, for example, but also having the um, knowledge in culture and social-cultural rules, let's say. Um, the process approach as dominant paradigm, it emphasizes supporting students through multiple stages of writing. For example, the pre-writing, the drafting, the feedback, the revision of the writing, rather than focusing only on the final product of what we are writing. Then we have the interconnectedness of reading and writing. Uh, like we said, pretty much these skills, reading and writing, are combined together, are complementary, and problems in writing can often be traced as problems in reading as well. And it needs for integrated instruction, not only feedback in writing, but also in reading as well, to improve both skills. Challenges for of grammar and error correction. This is a persistent issue in L2 writing. Research is inconclusive on effectiveness, and it suggests um, that we prioritize errors and alternative approaches to direct correction. And the impact on technology, I'm sorry. Um, Technological advancements have transformed writing and practices and tools. Um, and nowadays we have other possibilities that teachers in the past didn't have. Um, so writing requires adaptation and training, right? And those technological devices, let's say. Then we have important facts or ideas, the growing importance of L2 writing, um, globalization and technology, as I was mentioning, make that L2 written communication is essential for business, for education and social interaction. The cognitive perspective of L2 writing, combination of L1 writing ability and L2 proficiency. This is complex. It requires planning, it requires monitoring and revision, as I was saying. And L1 writing skills can transfer with sufficient L2 proficiency. The sociocultural perspective um, means becoming a member of the discourse community. As Saussure said, for example, when we speak a language, we become members of that speaking community. We begin to share values, to make assumptions, and to use conventions that the speaking community uses. Um, there's a difference between writing and speaking. Writing is planned. We need organization, and it leaves a permanent record. It lacks immediate feedback and is normally more formal and precise. And correctness is more highly valued in writing, right? When we are speaking, we can make mistakes and we don't normally realize, but in writing, we cannot write as we speak. Student background and needs. The curriculum must be circumscribed by student age. It also needs to pay attention to the background of the student. L1 literacy, formal versus informal English learning, and purpose. If it's for academical purposes, if it's for professional purposes. Um, then we have proficient writer habits. Writing is process that requires planning, as I mentioned, um, rereading what we wrote, revising. Um, Expert writers plan and revise uh, more for content, for organization, and less for surface changes. And the implication for L2 writers, they need more of everything, practice, strategies, genre, familiarity, vocabulary, grammar, feedback, language, the proficiency in language develops slowly. Um, then we have possible writing activities that we can do with students. The pre-writing activities, normally they are used to reduce anxiety, to plan ideas. For example, free writing, brainstorming, mind maps, um, targeted lessons on dictionary use, analysis. They also incorporate reading as starting points, and they consider the student challenges and the opportunities that we have as teachers. Um, the writing tasks, they vary. Um, they can be graded, ungraded, they can be improvised, they can be planned. And genres, for example, picture descriptions, advice, dictoglosses. For example, dictogloss is a classroom activity where the students reconstruct a text by listening. They note keywords and they reconstruct um, the text, and it's not it's different from a typical dictation activity where they write everything um, as we are saying. Uh, this can be used for students who have a low proficiency in the language. Um, we can also use summaries or proposal for higher um, proficiency level students. And then we have course design fundamentals, syllables, and objectives. Um, we have to articulate clearly um, and the observable learning outcomes, the product, the process, the audience, and the purpose, and use rubrics tailored for assignments. And then finally, the lesson planning. Basically, consider the writing cycle, the pre-writing, the writing, the revision, and editing, and individual lessons, activation, warm-up, core, closure, follow-up, um, and balance teacher-centered and student-centered activities. And the final slide um, basically talks about feedback, revision, and editing. This is essential for improvement. I think it's essential in all four skills. Um, we need to prioritize the global issues, like, for example, the content and the organization before the language. It's crucial that we provide students with oral feedback, like, for example, conferences or a podcast, or it can be written feedback. Um, Recorded comments can be faster, can provide listening practice, and preserve vocal cues, and prioritize errors, be consistent and explicit when we provide feedback. We can also profit from peer feedback. Um, Benefits include authentic audience, critical reading skills, and diverse focus. And the drawbacks, for example, inconsistent feedback or student resistance can be drawbacks. So we need to be prepared when providing feedback. For example, rationalize things, um, modeling, or make checklists.
Okay, finally, we have what we have as integrated skills. Somehow it repeats everything we said until now. They say that looking at the four macro skills integrated together is like a tapestry in which the four skills are like the strands in it. And the primary strands are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And the other threads could be considered vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation, syntax, meaning, and usage. So what is the integrated skill approach is more or less what Maxi and I have been saying in the different parts, that is like blending language skills intentionally in instruction, and so that the skills interact naturally together as in real life, and we don't see them as isolated practice but all integrated. It is a fact that historically they were taught more in a more segregated way, like for example, in grammar translation method, grammar analysis, written translation, little communicative practice. They used to be completely separate. Now they are more like integrated. Why this has changed? Well, because the segregated skills had some limitations, like it was an unnatural use of language. Learners were unprepared for real world interaction in which they are integrated. And this led to missed opportunities for authentic communication, and that's why before they were taught separately, and now the focus is more on integrated skills. For example, an intermediate reading class may include oral directions, which includes listening, discussed reading, which includes speaking and listening, written summaries, that is just writing. But nowadays, textbooks also often include multi-skills tasks. So nowadays, generally, the tendency is to prepare tasks or activities for students that integrate all of them. Why? Well, because of this that says here, because you have more exposure to authentic language, you have a more natural interaction, you have a rich and complex communication, and promotes real content learning, and this increases motivation in students as well. There are two key instructional models. We have the content-based language instruction and the task-based instruction, in which the content-based instruction emphasizes learning subject matter like science or social studies through language, while task-based instruction focuses on completing communicative tasks in English, often involving pair or group work, more like in real life, let's say. So what is the final thought is that the pedagogical model of integrated skills supports the development of complex cognitive processes, moving beyond simply answering questions to fostering deeper comprehension and self-regulation in learning. So, and that is our presentation about Macroskills. Maxi, I don't know if you want to add something or it's okay.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to say thank you.
Me too. Okay, so that's our presentation on Macroskills.